Hey, how's it going, everybody? Mr. Binder here, and we're here to talk about Chapter 9, Homeostasis. I broke the PowerPoint up into two sections. First, we're going to talk about what homeostasis is. I'm going to introduce to you some organ systems in the body, how they work to help to maintain homeostasis, and then I'm going to introduce to you the mechanism of action, how our body, what the mechanism our body takes in order to maintain homeostasis. And what is homeostasis? It's not just a definition, it's how our body works and functions together. All right, and some of the things that our body tries to maintain at a tolerable range would be our internal temperature, hormone levels, pH, pressure, concentrations of glucose in the blood, maybe some other solutes in the blood, and obviously water balance. These are just some examples. There are more examples, and our body tries to always continuously monitor and maintain a tolerable range. So what are we talking about here? Our internal environments. Internal environments are organ systems. All right, and these organ systems, they work together to keep things in check. All right, when blood glucose levels fall out of check, well, our body is going to take necessary steps in order to bring proper blood glucose levels back in place. And we're going to talk about some of these organ systems. The nervous system, obviously brain, spinal cord, all right, receives sensory data. So our nervous system would probably act like the sensory or the sensors throughout our body, detecting things and relaying those messages to our brain. So our brain can actually integrate that information. The endocrine system, very, very important. We'll talk about this in Chapter 10. What's involved with the endocrine system? A bunch of glands that secrete hormones, and these hormones will have specific action on cellular function. The excretory system we will talk about. The excretory system is mainly involved in maintaining proper pH level, right? Blood pH level, but not only that, water balance as well. Our skin, believe it or not, is an organ system. It's the largest organ of the body, and it will help to maintain that internal temperature, roughly right around 37 degrees Celsius. Our immune system is very important. Our immune system is very similar to, I guess, our circulatory system, in the fact that we are talking about blood cells here, but we're not specifically speaking about red blood cells. We're talking about white blood cells and their function on the body. And what they do is they travel around our circulatory system and they try to find things that shouldn't be in our body. For instance, bacteria, maybe a virus. And what these cells will do is attack those different, they're called antigen, and break them apart, protecting our body. The digestive system, again, you guys took a look at this in grade 10. Our digestive system breaks down food. We absorb the food that we break down into our bloodstream, which is then sent off to different tissues and cells that need those molecules. For instance, glucose, cellular respiration. Again, one of the reactants in cellular respiration is glucose. So we need glucose in our cells in order to make ATP. Circulatory system, this is like our highways and byways. If any type of molecule wants to transport itself from one point to the next, it's not going to use Google Maps. It's basically just going to be traveling through our circulatory system until it gets to a specific area where it is needed, and it can, again, diffuse across the membrane. Respiratory system, this is where we get our oxygen, all right, and we expel our carbon dioxide. Skeletal system provides support. All right. If we didn't have a skeletal system, we'd just be like blobs on the floor. Muscular system again provides support, and it's what helps us move our body. There are three different types of muscle tissue. We've got skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. Here we have the reproductive system. Again, the males, we have the testes, the females, we have the ovaries, each secreting their own hormone and having an effect on male and female development. Again, those are briefly, that's just an outline of each organ system that is involved in helping to maintain homeostasis. And again, homeostasis is just a broad term of how our body actually functions to try and keep things in check. So again, if we are trying to maintain internal temperature, what is our body going to do to help maintain that constant temperature? Okay, it's not a set number. All right, there's a range to it, but when we get too cold, what starts to happen to our body? It will start to make changes. Again, when it gets too hot, how is our body going to react and make necessary changes to decrease our internal temperature? And that's what this mechanism is in homeostasis. We'll talk about this mechanism called feedback systems. All right, there's positive and negative. Our body uses negative feedback systems more than positive feedback systems to bring things back into check, bring things back into balance. And we will talk about that mechanism. All right, here we have negative feedbacks. This is what our body mostly uses. We will talk about positive feedbacks, but let's say we have our body temperature has dropped. So again, if our body temperature has dropped, our body will sense that, send that message to our brains. Our brains will then integrate that information, figure out what to do, send the message back out to the body, so hopefully a change can be made, or our body will react to that drop in temperature and our internal temperature can then increase back to normal. All right, that's what a negative feedback mechanism is. All right, it includes three elements. We see we have a sensor here. Sensors are tissues, organs. Again, think nervous system. All right, we have those nerve cells throughout our body that can respond, change, and send those messages to our brain. Our integrator. Think hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is a region of the brain that will receive information from sensors or nervous system. All right, basically that are stimulated from either internal stimuli or external stimuli. All right, our hypothalamus will take information and it will then integrate it and figure out, does there need to be a change, or is everything still in check? All right, and if something does need to change, the integrator will send signals out to an effector. All right, and an effector could be maybe a muscle, it could be a gland, an endocrine gland, it could be a sweat gland, it could be to tell our arteries to vasoconstrict or vasodilate. There's a variety of things that the hypothalamus can send out as an effector signal. And hopefully when we get this, when this effector receives a signal, we'll get a response. And if we're talking about internal temperature, and we saw that there was a decrease in our internal temperature, hopefully with this negative feedback mechanism, after the signal's been sent out to the effector, the response will be to see an increase in internal temperature back to normal. All right, our bodies use negative feedback mechanisms more than positive feedback mechanisms. Positive feedback mechanisms don't try to bring things back to normal. Okay, they continually increase a change in environmental condition. Okay, this does not result in homeostasis. Okay, it kind of causes our bodies to function outside of normal. Okay, and this is a fight or flight response. All right, now some of the examples we have: reproduction here, so maybe giving birth, fever. All right, your body will go through a positive feedback mechanism to obviously fight off this infection. A sneeze is a positive feedback mechanism. A yawn is a positive feedback mechanism. Throwing up or vomiting is a positive feedback mechanism. Basically, your body is trying to understand what's happening, and if something needs to be brought out of balance in order to bring things back to balance, then our bodies will do that. The example I have for you here is the basically a mother giving birth. Okay? Once the water's broken, baby pushes against the cervix. Okay? The cervix will send signals, or the nerve endings in the cervix will send signals to the brain. The brain will stimulate the release of oxytocin. The oxytocin will then be created until the uterus and the baby will expel through the actual cervix. Okay, oxytocin will then increase contraction. All right, after contraction. All right, and once the baby's out, then a negative feedback mechanism will come into play. Oxytocin will stop being produced. All right, and then normal levels of oxytocin will then be brought back to normal. All right, there's two sections here, very important, homeostatic mechanisms that I'd like to talk about. The first one's thermoregulation, and then the next one's water balance or osmoregulation. All right, first I'd like to talk about thermoregulation, and then the second one I'd like to talk about is osmoregulation. Okay? Thermoregulation is how our body maintains an internal temperature. Osmoregulation is how our body maintains total body fluid. All right, there's a couple things that we will talk about with osmoregulation. Thermoregulation, again, negative feedback mechanisms are used here in both thermoregulation and osmoregulation. All right, it's just we're talking about different organ systems that are involved here. Right? So thermoregulation, internal temperature. Right? Our body needs to maintain an internal temperature of about 37 degrees Celsius. So again, how does our body do that? Our body recognizes our internal temperature through what's called thermoreceptors. Okay? These thermoreceptors are found through the integumentary system, which is our skin. All right? When there's a change in internal temperature, our body will recognize that and send that information to the brain. Now there's some triggers here. Obviously metabolism, the rate of reactions in the body, right, or the sum of all of the chemical reactions in our body is metabolism. Let's say there's an increase in our metabolism. Well, we know that one of the byproducts of metabolism is thermal energy. So our body will increase in internal temperature. All right, that's a trigger. Or the rate of thermal energy exchanged through the surface of the body, and we will discuss some ways at which thermal energy can be exchanged through the surface of the body. Again, the hypothalamus here is very important. The hypothalamus will receive information from these thermoreceptors, integrate that information, and if a change needs to be made, it will send out the necessary information to different organ systems, different tissues, different glands, until the internal temperature is brought back to this range here, which is about 35 to 37 degrees Celsius. All right, these are the two mechanisms. One of them will be on the test, very, very important. Basically, these are the necessary steps that our body will take in terms of either decreasing internal temperature because we're too hot or increasing internal temperature because we're too cold. Right? So when we get too hot, our body temperature rises above the set point. Hypothalamus will then see that, and what will the hypothalamus do? Well, it receives information from thermoreceptors, integrates information, and then it will send out information to blood vessels. Blood vessels dilating means that the lumen of the blood vessel will widen or get larger, allowing more blood flow. Right? Basically, it's called vasodilation. Again, it will send a message to our sweat glands to start producing sweat. Okay? Once sweat's produced, okay, then what can happen is the evaporation that occurs because the sweat forms on our skin will help to cool the body. That's when our body temperature rises. When our body temperature decreases, again, thermoreceptors send the necessary information to the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus sends information out to our blood vessels to vasoconstrict or get skinnier. Okay, skeletal muscles will start to shiver. All right, blood flow will become reduced. All right, less thermal energy will be lost to the environment, and hopefully because of the shivering and the amount of blood flow that's being reduced here will help to increase body temperature. All right, one of these mechanisms will be on the test. Again, we see here, this is just a nice flow chart of what happens when our bodies experience a change in core temperature. Basically, there's a couple mechanisms of thermal energy exchange. Again, I said this is a trigger response. Some of the mechanisms include conduction, convection, radiation, and evaporation. Okay? All of them act simultaneously to help maintain internal temperature, and we'll talk about each of them. Right? It occurs at the surface of our integumentary system. Right? Conduction is just the flow of thermal energy between molecules, all right, that are in direct contact with each other. Okay? Convection is just the transfer of thermal energy within a fluid, liquid, or gas. Okay, moving air. Radiation, this is thermal energy that's transferred electromagnetically. Okay, this is basically emitted from our body. And then evaporation. Okay, this is what happens when we form sweat on our skin. Okay, it's loss of heat by the evaporation of water, and we'll actually start to feel cool when we do start sweating. All right, we are called endotherms, and the reason why we're called endotherms is because we are warm-blooded animals. Okay, and we use physiological mechanisms, okay, like metabolism here, to generate thermal energy to help maintain body temperature. Okay? We obviously are fully active over a wide range of temperatures, all right? And we also need a constant supply of energy. Remember that molecule glucose. We always are in a need of glucose in order to perform cellular function. All right, this is the first section of the slides that I'd like to discuss. Again, it's thermoregulation. We will talk about osmoregulation. Thermoregulation will be on the test. You'll need to know one of the mechanisms of thermoregulation, basically what happens to your body when you experience an increase in internal temperature and then when you experience a decrease in internal temperature. But I'd like you to familiarize yourself with these negative feedback mechanisms and the elements that come with it. Again, you see the sensor, the integrator, which is the hypothalamus, and then we see an effector. There are a couple more elements that are added to that. Obviously, there needs to be some sort of stimulus that this sensor needs to detect. And in this case here, it is a rise and fall in our core body temperature. That is the stimulus. Okay, so keep that in mind when we are discussing these negative feedback mechanisms.